tour is called Royalists and Rebels, and it's all about the English Civil War, the British Civil War, the Allied Civil War, whatever you want to call it these days. Now, the English Civil War starts in 1642, ends in 1651. We have two forces fighting one another. We have our Royalists following King Charles I, and we have our Parliamentarians following, well, Parliament, the clues in the name. Now, why are they fighting? It's very complicated, but I'd like to boil it down to three major points: money, power, and religion. No surprises there when it comes to a war, I'm afraid. So, how does it all kick off? Well, we've got King Charles I, wonderful king. Now, King Charles I believes in his power. He believes in a thing called the divine right of kings. And this is the belief that he's being appointed by God to rule England. And so anyone that dares advise him is going against the word of God. And so he doesn't get along with Parliament particularly well. And in fact, they get so upset with one another, he dissolves Parliament. He says, I've had enough of you. And he engages in what is known as the 11-year tyranny. Parliament named it that. It wasn't actually that bad. It was quite a peaceful time in England. Things were going quite well. But trouble was on the horizon. And that trouble came with religion. Because King Charles I was going to marry a woman known as Henrietta Maria of France. Beautiful woman, wonderful woman, great political ally, but she was a Catholic. And that is an issue for England because we were Protestants. And we didn't like Catholics all too much, especially after Guy Fawkes and his escapades. So, this starts to create a rumour that the king has Catholic sympathies, and this upsets people. And in fact, he tries to change some of the Bible unrelated to Catholicism, but he tries, and that upsets certain Scottish people up so much that they create a rebellion and they attack or they declare war. Now, the king, with this rebellion going on, needs money to supply his troops. The problem is, the best way to get money is taxes. The only people that can legally collect taxes was Parliament, and he's got rid of them. So he had to go back to Parliament, politely ask them to come back and raise these taxes for his war. They agree under the condition that he can never dissolve them again, which is a long Parliament. They conduct the war, everything goes well, King Charles I wins, but unfortunately he's still left Parliament that he can't get rid of. And they still don't like each other, and things start to snowball out of control to the point where the king starts to try and arrest members of Parliament, fearful that they're going to overthrow him. He fails to do so, panics, runs away from London over to Nottingham, and that's when the war kicks off, basically. And that's how we start with this very complicated and nasty civil war. Now, during this conflict, we got two forces fighting one another, like I said, and we often see these forces as very distinct characters. We often see the Royalists as the Cavaliers, rich, handsome men on the backs of horses, and then we see the Parliamentarians as the Roundheads, poor, dour, ugly individuals wearing armour a bit like this you see there. But the truth of the matter is, this is a war of ideologies, it's not a war on fashion. Both sides are from the exact same country. Both sides are using the exact same equipment. The only difference you'll find is that your Cavaliers, whether they're Parliamentarians or Royalists, are typically rich, and your Roundheads, whether they're Parliamentarian or Royalists, are typically poor. Okay, so the only difference you're going to find is that if you've got a sash, the sash for a Royalist was red, the sash for a Parliamentarian was orange. Although there were various colours out there to do with regiments and places that they came from. The Scottish had different colours and whatnot. And that's kind of the synopsis of the English Civil War. But what we are here is in armour, a museum on arms and armour. So when we continue our tour around through this door here, we're going to be looking at the specific types of soldiery and the specific arms and armour that they use. So if you want to follow me, we'll continue on. Now we're going to start off by looking at the cavalry, this side of the cavalry is here, and we're going to start off by looking at the heavy cavalry. Now is anyone here confident enough to guess which side's the heavy cavalry? Yeah, swear on the heavy metal is. So over here we have what we refer to as cuirassiers. And the cuirassiers were much like the medieval knight. They'll get upon their horses, they'll take up their lances, and they'll charge headlong into their opponents. But there is a big difference between the equipment of the medieval knight and a cuirassier of the English Civil War. And the biggest difference is the armour. So whilst it looks quite similar, this armour is in fact musketball-proof, which the earlier armours were not. Earlier armours tend to be much higher carbon, much more brittle, compared to the later armours which were made a bit thicker, a bit softer, to deal with those musketball strikes. And we know they're musketball-proof because they write about it, but there's also evidence upon the armour itself. And in fact, this chap here, you can see there's a dent on his breastplate both sides, and that probably was the result of some sort of conflict or fight. Whilst over here we have a dent in the breastplate and one on either tasset and long leg guards that you see. This is probably not battle damage. This is probably from a process known as proofing. because you see, this armour takes a long time to make, it costs a lot of money to make, and so when you buy it, you want to make sure it works. And so a very common practice when you get this armour created was to have the armour improve the armour. So you would have the armour all brand new, you would come up to the armourer, and the armourer in your presence would take a pistol and shoot the armour to make sure that it doesn't go through. If it doesn't go through, great, pay the man, go up to battle knowing you're well protected. If it does go through, well, I don't know, ask for a discount maybe. Or find yourself a new armourer, is my advice. Now, in fact, you have to be quite careful with your armourers. It was a very common practice for many armourers to undercharge the pistol that they proved your armour with. So make sure you get a trustworthy fellow as well, because they might be sending you to battle with armour that doesn't work. But yeah, so that's our cuirassier. Now this armour was very well made, but very heavy, being a bit thicker. On average, these armours weighed around 35 to 45 kilograms, which is quite a lot of metal to take into battle. But the chaps buying it were typically well suited to it, they would have trained in it, they would have known what they're doing. Unfortunately for the cuirassier and the heavy cavalry, their time in the conflict was very short. They had maybe a year, maybe 2 years as a sort of mass heavy cavalry unit, and then they started to fade away out of relevance. This sort of armour survived throughout the entire conflict for the generals, for individuals of very high importance, and we want to make sure stay alive, but as a mass heavy cavalry unit, they start to disappear. And the reason for that is everything we kind of touched upon. It's very expensive, it's quite heavy, it takes a long time to build, so when you're in the middle of a conflict, you don't often have that luxury of a run-up time to get your next bit of kit. Also, we're dealing with new types of warfare. The heavy cavalry going against pikes and shot doesn't work as effectively. And so what they start to move towards is light cavalry known as the Armouries, and that's over this part of the hand. Now the Armouries has breastbacks, just like the cuirassier, still musket ball proof, just a lot less of it, much easier to produce. The helmet has been reduced to bare bones, it's known as a 3-bar pot. The 3 bars upon the face to protect against sword, slice, and cuts. Sometimes referred to as a lobster pot because of that tail at the back of the helmet there, protecting the nape on the back of the neck. Now the buff jacket was traditionally a hunting jacket or a forester's jacket, someone that would wear it out into the wilderness. It's a very thick leather jacket, and it was very, very good protection against cuts like swords and things of that nature. And some of these could be made so thick, in fact 5mm thick in certain places of the jacket, that they could resist small arms fire from certain ranges. So very, very good protection, a lot cheaper to make, and a lot easier to produce. There is a downside. These jackets, and I've worn a fair few myself, 1, smell awful, 2, get like a pair of brand new boots, you need to wear them in. So they're not as good in terms of their mobility as a cuirassier suit of armour with those beautiful articulated plates designed for your body. So it's not as nice to wear, it's not as comfortable, but like I said, cheaper and easier to use. Now, they obviously changed the way they fought as a result. The heavy cavalry idea of charging headlong into the enemy wasn't working. So the cuirassiers, the Armouries adopted a slightly different style of fighting, more of a skirmishing style of fighting, although not all did conduct that way, I suppose. And the idea was that you would ride up towards the opponent and you would use firearms. And you ride up towards them, you shoot, and then you ride away to reload, and you come back, and you harass the enemy, wear them down over time. Now, Prince Rupert, which is an image behind us here, was a Royalist cavalryman. He did not conduct his cavalry charges in that fashion. He was much more of a fan of charging headlong into the opponent, drawing the pistols at point blank range, and hitting them where it hurts, dropping people out of the fight very quickly, and then drawing swords. But we've spoken a little bit about how they're fighting and what they're fighting with. So, we've spoken about firearms, I should really mention them. The predominant firearm that was popularly used by the Armouries was, of course, the pistol. There are 2 forms of pistols, the flintlock or the wheel lock. If you want to know more about that, I'll tell you at the end when you've got a little bit more time. But there was also blunderbusters, which are like shotguns. There's also small muskets, which are called carbines. So there was a number of firearms that people used. And these flintlock pistols operate in a very, well, I'll tell you how they operate. Essentially what you're going to do to load this weapon is you're going to tip it upright, and you're going to put gunpowder down the barrel, musket ball down the barrel, paper known as wadding down the barrel, remove the scouring stick, reverse it, stick it inside, and ram the charge home. That's an important part of the process. If you don't ram it home, gunpowder is actually quite a slow explosive. In the opening it goes whoosh like a flame rather than bang. So you need to really pack it in to give it that sort of propellant energy. But also, if you don't pack it in, pockets of air can exist within the barrel, and when you set it off, they can expand and possibly rupture the barrel. So there's 2 reasons why you don't want to let that happen. Remove the scouring stick, because you can shoot it whilst that's in there, but it will skewer a guy spectacularly, and you won't be able to reload your weapon. So place that back under the barrel where you found it, and then I'm going to bring the weapon around, and you've got your pan, with a little shelf on the side of the firearm, and in that pan we put more gunpowder, and then we close the pan cover. Now once the pan cover is closed, we've got a tall bit of steel known as a prism, and that's going to sit upright over that pan. The hammer is going to be pulled back to full cock. Inside that hammer is a flint, and when I pull the trigger, the hammer is released. The flint strikes the prism, causing a spark, drop into the pan, igniting the gunpowder there. And then there's a tiny hole known as a touch hole, which is going to allow access to breach the weapon where the main charge is, and that ignites and shoots the firearm. And you go through that every time you want to take one shot. So it takes a while to reload. On average, you're looking at one, maybe two shots in a minute, maybe. Good. And that's how those operate. So you can see why you do sort of ride up, shoot, ride away, reload, ride up, shoot, ride away, reload. The problem with the pistol is it's not very accurate. You know, if I was to try to take a pistol and shoot that buckshot over there, it'd be hard to do. And it's not because of a bad shot, it's because these are smooth-bore weapons. So the projectile doesn't always come out in a straight line. It can sometimes bounce up and down the barrel. There's no spin to the projectiles, it doesn't stabilise very well. So it's a very, very close-range weapon, which is why Prince Rupert preferred the idea of running in there, drawing it, touching the individual with the pistol before shooting, and then continuing the sword. Because at least then you're guaranteed hits, guaranteed taking people out of the fight. So in terms of swords, there are two major types of swords. We've got our back swords and our rapiers. Back swords, broad-bladed, designed for cutting, really. They're often referred to as back swords because they typically have a very thick spine. So you usually have a single sharp edge, and then the back of it will be a thick spine. And they'll often have a basket hooked to the bottom, which is really good protection for the hands and wrist. Although some of them are old medieval swords that have been converted into the more modern style, so some of them do have two sharp edges as well. These are, like I said, very popular on the battlefield. They're quite heavy, they're quite robust, and as a cavalryman, being able to hack and slash at your opponent is far easier to achieve. Now, there are limitations. Your opponents are wearing armour very good against hacking and slashing. It's very hard to bypass those elements with the edge of the blade. But with a buff bow, if you hit them hard enough, you're still going to break the bones, you're still going to bruise them, you're still going to cause enough grief that you might stop fighting. So they are very effective weapons. The rapier was almost its counterpoint. The rapier was a thrusting weapon. It's designed to basically use the sharp point and thrust into the opponent. And off the back of a horse, that can be a little bit more difficult. If you imagine I'm riding on a horse, I come towards my opponent, I thrust into the target, but be very accurate, so I make sure I hit something soft that I can pierce through. But also, if I do manage to pierce through, the sword tends to go quite deep, and retrieving the sword as I ride past can be quite difficult. There are techniques for it, and it is achievable, but it does take a little bit more finesse. And the pros and the cons of the two are quite obvious. Swords for thrusting and cutting have always been at odds with each other, because the argument has always been with cutting, you're going to offer a much more disabling wound. You're going to cut through muscles, you're going to cut through tendons, you're going to very immediately take that person out of the fight. You're not necessarily going to kill them. Thrusting, on the other hand, is far more fatal. It goes deeper, it hits more vital organs and things of that nature. But people don't often know they're dead very quickly from a sword thrust like that. Most of the time you get thrust and you won't know that this happened, and you'll carry on fighting, and then it's 3 days later that you die of an infection. So there's always pros and cons of both. Very grisly, I know, but yeah. So those are the two major swords that we see on those battlefields. Now, we spoke about the rich and the famous, what about the poor and the ugly? Well, they're behind us, so we're going to look at the infantry now. So we swap sides. For now. So pike, we're going to battle using pikes, surprise. What is a pike? It's a very long spear. How long? Well, it starts all the way over, it is half counting. It doesn't end until we get all the way over to the point of it over here. Very long weapon. So that's great, because it means if I'm a pikeman, I get to keep my enemy really far away from me, which is exactly where I want them. The downside to the pike is very long, very cumbersome, and once you get past the pointy bit, it's not very threatening. So how do we make that pike effective? Well, what we do is we stand in a formation known as a hedgerow. Several men wide, several men deep, all pointing the pikes in the same direction. The idea being that if I get past the first one, there's another one in my face, get past the second one, another one in my face. Makes for a very good and hard to attack position. But of course, they're still getting harassed by firearms and musketeers, so we still need to arm our poor chaps. So they have breastplate and backplate, just like the pike. Of course, yeah, still musket ball proof. They have pike additions though. They have a gorget, which is a metal collar that sits underneath the breastplate, and that's not there to protect the neck necessarily from any cuts or slices or direct attacks. What it's there for is to protect the neck from anything sliding up. So if you're going against other pikes and they hit you in the chest, what can happen is the pike tip will slide up towards the throat. That's there to try and catch that tip. Very, very effective. Helmets are slightly different. We don't have any face guards on them, and that's typically because really the face can be protected by just lowering the head. Obviously, on the back of a horse, you don't always have that option. But with a pike, when you're talking about doing stand up your pike, there's something towards the face, just lower the head down to hit the top of the head. And you've got that lovely sort of ridge that goes around it, and that's there to again redirect forces away from the body. Armour is about redirecting forces almost more than it is about just resisting them. So the idea is that a sword will strike the top of his helmet, it'll skit off to the left, skit off to the right, and that fringe is going to stop it from just sliding down to the shoulder. Yeah, so that's why the helmet design the way it is. Tassets, so the tassets and the pikemen overlap, and that's very peculiar because when you look at them and you wear them, what happens is one goes up, and then if you lift your other leg up, it pushes both those plates up, and it actually makes it very difficult to move and walk around. In fact, so difficult that many pikemen have noted to actually just remove one of the tassets because they're fed up of it. But the reason it's designed though with the overlapping is because if I'm going to engage my enemy as a pikeman, I'm standing side on. And so that overlapping means that it's going to cover that gap in between the legs. So it's very, very important in terms of defense. Now, if I was to charge my enemy as a pikeman, for instance, I'd take the end of my pike, the palm of my hand, I'd take the other part here, lift it up underneath the chin, and when given order to charge, I charge like this. Charge! I don't know why you're laughing, it's not funny. Yeah, you sort of crab towards the enemy. Now, why do you charge like that? Well, like I said before, the pikeman is only as good as its formation. And if you start running in there, screaming at the enemy, going as fast as you can, the formation dissipates, it breaks apart very quickly, and it makes you very vulnerable to counterattacks from cavalry or any infantry. So everything was done to the rhythm of a drum, to the sound of an officer shouting. It was step by step, it was drill work. And I always sort of say that this is kind of the beginning of that soldiery. This is the beginning of people working together as a unit to achieve a goal, rather than the individual warriors that we imagine in the medieval period. So that's how the pikeman operated. Now, often people ask about these weapons here, so two halberds, two partisans, two leading staffs. These are weapons of office for the pikeman formations. They are effective weapons in and of themselves, but they are usually used to encourage all men to go the right direction. Because funny enough, in the midst of battle, pikemen can get a little bit lost sometimes, and they want to go the other way where the enemy isn't. So me, as the officer with my halberd, needs to remind them the enemy's in that direction. And if I continue to forget where the enemy is, then I hope that less politely, and I get someone to replace them. It's a very nasty side of how arms were run back in the day, and it's a practice that went well into World War I and even elements of World War II. So that's kind of what those weapons are for. Now over here we have our musketeers, and these aren't the French musketeers. These are not the guards of the king. These are not the fancy swashbucklers that we often imagine when we talk about musketeers. These are English musketeers, and they are often the poorest of the poor, the lowest of the low, the most expendable men you've got. And the reason for that is because, quite frankly, the technology that we were running with and giving to these soldiers was very dangerous. So matchlock muskets, they operate very similar to my pistol that I showed earlier. You put the musket ball, black powder and wadding down that barrel, and you prime your pan on the side. The difference is in the source of ignition. So instead of having a frizzen and a flint to strike it called a spark, you have a serpentine that pinches onto a match, which is a bit of rope that is set on fire essentially, and when you pull the trigger, it will dump that rope into the pan for you. Now these bits of rope would soak in saltwater, make them burn very slowly. And what you do is, as a musketeer, you have them lit right at the beginning of the fight to keep them lit throughout the entire battle, and you put them on the gun when you need one, this, that, and the other. The problem is, gunpowder and the constant source of ignition meant a lot of accidents happened, and musketeers were blowing themselves quite frequently. Also, musketeers were often not given too much training. There was accounts of some musketeers being given a musket that they've never held before in their life, given an afternoon's training, and then the next day sent to a battle. So you can imagine, again, if you don't know what you're doing, you don't know what you've got on you, it can be a very, very dangerous place to be. Now, the other problem we had was a lot of musketeers were overcharging their muskets. They didn't quite understand how much gunpowder was required. So they were provided at some point with a bandolier, which is little bottles, wooden bottles, each one containing just the right amount of gunpowder to set up the shot. And unfortunately, again, these aren't particularly well made. There are gaps, they're not airtight, sparks and will find themselves inside those bottles, and again, these guys are well by firecrackers. Very, very dangerous. Now, if you were to use the weapon effectively, you are shooting accurately to about 90 yards, you're shooting in volleys, which means that you're all shooting at the same time, because there is no ways of sighting these weapons, they don't have sights upon them. And if you continue to do that over duration, what happens is the weapon will foul. And the fouling leads to gunpowder residue building up in the barrel, meaning you can't load the weapon. That basically means that you can't use it. Now 10 minutes and a bit of boiling water, the gun will be brand new, but often you did not get access to these 10 minutes or boiling water on the front of the battlefield. So many pikemen, by the end of the battle, will actually not be shooting their enemy, but using their musketeers, will be using their muskets as giant clubs. And they'll be running in there and just beating and cracking people over the head with them. Nasty, nasty bits of work. And that's how most battles ended. You had musketeers clubbing each other to death. You had pikemen engaging what's known as push a pike, the idea that they would skewer one another unspectacularly, and then the pikes rise up towards the sky, and then when you're face to face with your enemy and your pointy bits up towards the clouds, what do? Well, you hit them, you punch them, you bite them, you kick them, you do whatever you can to get them to run away. It's a nasty, nasty time. And then you've got the cavalry, who typically would charge it to the enemy cavalry, and whoever won that engagement would then win basically free reign over that entire battlefield. They can use their speed and mobility to then choose targets amongst the infantry and break those apart. Now the English Civil War comes to an end in 1651. King Charles I ends his reign slightly shorter as he had his head cut off, and Oliver Cromwell, who didn't start as much of a name if I'm honest, works his way up through the parliamentarian forces and ranks to become the leader of those forces and subsequent winner of the English Civil War. And believe it or not, as soon as he wins, you know what he does? Dissolves Parliament. He's had enough of them. He's like, oh, the king had a point, these people are annoying, and he gets rid of them, and he declares himself Lord Protector of England. And as Lord Protector of England, he brings in some very popular laws, such as banning theatre, football, and Christmas. And then when he finally passes away, he passes all that power he had to his son. And people start to go, hang on a minute, this looks quite familiar. One man ruling our country, passing all that power to their sons. At least with the monarchy, we had Christmas. And what we start to see is a slight resurgence in the popularity of the monarchy. Because many parliamentarians, in all seriousness, did not sign up to kill the king. They did not sign up to get rid of the monarchy as an institution. They signed up to give the parliament more permanence and power within that established ruling system. And so a lot of them did not like the idea that their king had been killed. In fact, Alexander Popham, who started off as a parliamentarian, who's that lovely portrait out, his portrait along with this suit of armour here, he actually turns Pope at the end of the war, becomes a royalist, and he helps, along with many others, get King Charles II out of exile in France, back onto the throne here in England, and we're sort of back to where we started. But it wasn't all for naught. You know, we have just established a monarchy that they can't get away with anything. You know, people have power, they can't have power. And whilst we weren't a democratic country at all, like we would consider today, after this conflict, I believe it was one of the many steps that we had to take as a nation to get to this place that we are today. So hopefully you enjoyed the tour. I hope you found it interesting. If you have any further questions, feel free to ask me. There's a few items I don't get to cover for the time months. With that said, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.